creating a cost-conscious culture across departments. So I'm really excited to have 4 members of our executive advisory board here to join us with a wealth of knowledge and well-rounded knowledge in all these areas. So please come on aboard. We're going to have Jody Markopolous, who's going to moderate for us, Sam Friesmeier up next, and then we have Bernard Hensey and Craig Melrose. So welcome, everybody. Thank you.
All right, my esteemed colleagues have joined me. So I am Jody Markopolous. Just to give you a little background about me, it's great to be on the advisory board. I spent 27 years in the energy industry in 2 big companies by the name of General Electric and Baker Hughes. 3 years ago, I kind of went out on my own. I've been in a startup, I've been in private equity, and I've been in consulting. And my background is largely in operations. I've spent a lot of time in sourcing, plants, materials, EHS, you name it. So I'm here representing, I'm sharing that because I'm here to represent the supply chain side of the things. So today we're going to talk about product cost culture. What's a product cost culture, how important it is, and really not just how important it is at the inception, but across the entire life cycle, from the beginning to the end, to the service, to late stage. And it's really important across businesses today because cash and profitability are more important than ever for survival. So my colleagues here today, we've assembled this panel. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I just want to let you know we figured out we represent over 120 years of experience, so ask any and all questions, to talk about this topic. And first I'm going to start with my friend here, Sam, to my left.
Hi, I'm Sam Friesmeier. I've worked 40 plus years in the off-road equipment industry. Primarily agricultural space, and primarily in the area of product development, engineering, product management, a little bit in the services side, but I'm going to be representing the engineering and product development perspective on the panel.
Yeah, and hi, I'm Bernard Hensey. Very happy to be on the advisory board with A Priori. Previously, I was Vice President for Commercial Business with Boeing, working on the services side, introduced 28 new products in 3 years. And my representation here is to represent the commercial side of the enterprise and how it relates to product development.
And Jody was smart to put the operations people on both ends to,
Keep control.
Sandwich Bernard and Sam here. Craig Melrose. I've been at PTC, software industrial company, CAD, PLM, IoT, AR, service types of products for about the last 5 years. Prior to that, I was at McKinsey & Company for over 20 years in their operations practice, product development, manufacturing, supply chain, procurement, capital productivity. Worked with about half the Fortune 500, have worked in every vertical industry, so lots of pattern recognition from all of that. The reason McKinsey thought that I was decently knowledgeable about operations was prior to that I was at Toyota North America, responsible for new product introduction for all of the North American weld shops. And so designing equipment, designing plans, bringing product and process together, supporting plans for launch, and helping them get to full volume.
Awesome. So as we came together to discuss how we thought we wanted to talk about this topic, we want to bring to your attention this illustration because it looks like a flywheel, but hopefully you see that it also looks like a racetrack with hurdles. And why we did that is we wanted to denote the notion of this as a team sport. And just like a product life cycle goes from stage to stage to stage, so does a bunch of hurdles and the functions that go along with stage to stage to stage. So in representation of this, it's always good to start with what you see right there as customer requirements. And my friend Bernard over here, I'm going to steal a line from him that he's brought up as we've discussed how we want to approach this was every great product and successful business starts with the customer. Very profound words.
Thank you.
Share what you mean by that when it comes to this representation and your experience at Boeing.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. And I'm glad to see the cycle represented here. There's huge advances being made in connecting with our customers. And with that, if you look at some of the challenges traditional manufacturing industries have from new entrants, The idea of moving to a more agile environment, right, and using iteration and a cyclic view to product development are some key concepts that's moving forward. But to be specific here, the viewing your customer requirements on a canvas, allocating what is minimum viable, that is, what are really the features that your customer use, and then working out a methodology to move from left to right towards those canvas goals. So customer requirements and understanding of customer requirements are critical, but having a structured approach, and there's many of them out there like pragmatic marketing or agile product management, having a structured approach to take the key minimum requirements and translating them into engineering design in a team fashion is absolutely critical to success.
So Sam, let's take you up because you're the next guy on the wheel. Sometimes as the handover begins and you start the research and the design process, you don't exactly always get all the kudos for being focused on cost, which we know is a myth because engineers really care about cost. Give us your perspective as you take those customer requirements and you think about product life cycle in terms of its cost. How is that? How do you share some of your experiences there?
Yeah, the agile model that Bernard referenced is of course very popular in engineering today, particularly software. Everybody doing software is using it. A lot more mechanical design is starting to use it. But it really carries this idea that it not only starts with the customer, it ends with the customer. And if he doesn't like what he gets, you failed, or at least you didn't reach the success that you wanted to reach, and so you iterate. And so the idea of spending 10 years giving the customer what he wanted 10 years ago is just not useful. If I can do it in 10 weeks, I get a chance to learn from that first iteration, make a second iteration, and continue tuning that design to the customer requirements. When you think about those requirements, that you're going to have functional requirements, reliability requirements, durability requirements. Why not also have cost requirements and sustainability requirements? It's just another set of targets on the design, but if you can put those targets in place early in the process before the design is complete, you got a better chance of actually incorporating that into the objectives that the engineers are designing to. Every good design is a compromise. It has to be. There are no perfect answers. So it's always a trade-off between the various requirements that have been put in place. And the engineer is not ever going to know if he's reached that perfect compromise or not unless he asks the guy who asked for it. And so this idea of going in small iterations and fine-tuning your design towards the requirement, it also allows the customer to change his mind. Now, none of our customers have ever done that, but I've heard that it happens in places. And so the ability to react to a customer that changes their mind is also pretty important. To do that, the digital thread becomes almost indispensable. If you can't keep a common shared view of what it is you're designing in front of this whole extended and sometimes globally diverse team, you're not going to get to your targets. And so the ability to say, I'm going to make a design iteration, I'm instantly going to see what the cost is, I'm going to see what the processes are that need to build that part, and determine if my factories have those processes or if my suppliers can source to those processes. That just does incredible good for your project so that those discussions can happen while the design is still in process, and the design that gets finalized is the one that you actually go to iteration with. Take it back to the customer, see how he likes it, go from there, rinse and repeat.
And as you talk about compromise and engineers from a supply chain perspective, one of the ways that we experienced great cost collaboration was when engineers took a field trip into the factory or took a field trip into the suppliers. It was an opportunity for there to be a validation of the design and a debate or a discussion as it was in formulation back to those customer requirements, whether or not it was going to fit the cost profile or the target that you set for.
Well, and that's a great opportunity if you can do it, but in the world we're in right now and at the pace we're running, I'm going to take 6 engineers and go on a trip for 2 or 3 days to see one process when I've got 300 that I'm designing into. You can do some of that and you have to, but you can't do all of that. And so you're still going to need some help to support you with the other processes you didn't visit.
Totally agree. Craig, punting this over to you. You've seen this story happen a number of times when you look at different companies, Toyota, McKinsey, PTC, your consulting experience. What have you seen that become red flags that the team's not working together and cost is going to drift?
Sure. Certainly it gets back to culture, right? I don't know if anybody in the room has ever seen this or heard this, but has anyone ever seen it was them, right? Or even heard them. I hate them, because them is always causing the problems. But somehow they are also inside the company. And so it's this, I think it's too warm, you think it's not cold enough. We're saying the same thing, but we don't know it. We don't take the time to slow down and realize it. We don't understand what's your impact, what's my impact. And so there's this just disconnect where everybody's running quickly to accomplish what they want to accomplish in a really short time horizon, right? I'm thinking 1 week out, 1 month out, and nobody's slowing down enough to say, are we at the same purpose? Are we complementing one another? Or do you have a better idea? Are we thinking more of a year out rather than a week or a month out? And because of all of those problems, everyone tends to get slightly or dramatically misaligned. And just not a lot of organizations are slowing down and having a conversation with a friend to figure it out.
So would you say healthy tension?
I don't even know that it's healthy, but it's tension.
Tension can be good, right? If it
Tension, absolutely.
drives the organization to a better spot.
Absolutely.
But back to the customer, how is, as a company, Bernard goes through this process, and it starts with the customer and the communication, how do you see that unfold from that customer perspective? And how does the functional depth in organization support you, and as it irons out some of the, I call it healthy tension, some of that tension to get to the right spot?
Yeah, and organizations struggle with this because by definition, an organization needs to organize, right? And you can have hierarchical organizations, you can have matrix organizations, and I think everybody in this room has probably been through the mill and trying to figure out what's best at what time. But similar to as we're arranged on the stage, it is about teamwork. Once you define the customer requirements, once you have a roadmap of delivering to that customer requirements, to get this sort of flywheel effect moving and turning it into a virtual effect, measurement is critical. And a lot of us focus on what we would call traditional outcome measures. How is the product doing? How much does it cost? To deliver on time. But there are two other critical dimension of measures that we should also look at. The first one is interaction measures. And within manufacturing, we don't look at this a lot, but a lot of the technologies companies do that. Is how do we measure how the customer is engaging with our product? And how do we feed that back into the organization? And the second one is probably the most important one is what I would call the perception metrics. Is that as a customer engages with the product that we've developed, how do we structure their view of how do they like it? I know it's hard to measure that sometimes, but we can using digital techniques, get a real understanding of the customer's perception or view. And then combining interaction activities with perception activities, and then the outcome of your product with the customer gives you a complete data set by which your team can process and work out how to evolve your product along the product canvas that we described earlier.
Another element of that data set, though, is it's got to be a common data set, because I can't have one truth and you have another truth on where we are on the cost of a product, or if I'm optimizing cost and you're optimizing margin, those are not the same thing, although they're related.
Yeah.
I mean, price versus cost. Excellent. So when you think about that, and you just picked up a very important point, is metrics, right? Our organization, our people get measured on outcomes. They get measured on business success. So Sam, back to you on this one. When you were in engineering, how would you get those customer success metrics or those perception metrics understood or communicated in your organization?
Well, it can come a couple of ways. Again, Bernard referred to this idea of organization, and sometimes organizations create their own lives. And so we get requirements coming in from a product management who got them from marketing, who got them from the dealer, who never talked to a customer. And okay, that's a set of requirements, but they may not be what your customer actually wanted. On the other hand, I can go out and talk to 3 customers, and if I'm on an unlucky day, they don't represent what the majority of the market is going to need from that product. So we've got to find that balance between the aggregated results that comes through the organization that's very good at looking at our segments and our profitability opportunities, and the customer themselves who says, yeah, that's all well and good, but that's not what I asked for, and find that. And it's messy. Engineers in the room are going to know this. It's messy, and so there's nothing like a working product to go out and figure out if you hit the mark or not. In fact, it's one of the tenets of agile development. Let's make something. Let's make that first iteration and put it in the hands of real customers and see how they like it, because that ultimately is what's testing your requirements.
And then iterate on that.
And then iterate. Ideally, if I can get a customer on my development team, that's even better.
In my career, when we used to do that, we used to have a joint metric with engineering focused on productivity. Could we get more productivity in the factory through design change, or a feedback loop with a supplier that helped us have a common goal versus engineering just focused on getting the design done and sourcing and manufacturing, just getting the product out the door. And so having more of those, maybe it's not the full team effect. I completely concur we need a perspective on customer success, and definitely a metric organizationally for everyone on the customer success. What about micro metrics like that? Have any of you seen any of that in your career to entice functional organizations to focus on the cost of the product from the business perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll come in here with when I was at Boeing, we had a very successful product called Aircraft Health Management, and it used to work with the customers and generate data that the aircraft was generating in terms of fault data, whatever. We also had this other very successful product, which was called My Boeing Fleet, or Parts Page, which was the interaction that we have with our customers in engaging with buying parts. We'd never connected those two, right? And we started to use digital technology, digital data, to try and instrument what people were doing on aircraft health management and linking that back to parts so that we could stock the inventory that we were anticipating they'd need from the aircraft health management. And that's the idea of those micro, like the detail and the work needed to really understand CX, customer experience, is deep. You can't do it at a high level. You actually need many metrics, and you need to have a sort of deep psychological understanding of how the customer is engaging with the product to be successful with.
It's like the X's connecting to the Y.
Exactly,
right?
and it's only when you connect those dots and you can join them across the organization, because the data, then you end up talking about data and not perceptions or views or different values. That's when the organization can team around that data set.
Craig, you've seen a lot of companies. Who's gotten it right? And what secrets did you learn when you were there?
Most don't get it right. And I think it's a bit of what was already described, right? It's complex. I think I'll come at it a couple different directions. One way to view it would be you have a tool set, you have a skill set, and you have a mindset. The metrics are almost at the tool set level, and that's as far as a lot of organizations go. They don't necessarily have the right skill set or bring the right skill set or assemble the right skill set. Therefore, they'll never get to the right mindset, right? One way to view it. Another would be everyone thinks the top of the organization is always disconnected from the bottom of the organization. They're not, but the translation is not happening. The top of the organization is absolutely worried about financials. The bottom of the organization is worried about operational metrics. Well, operational metrics should turn into financial metrics, and financial metrics should turn into operational metrics. A lot of times it's really hard to understand how they connect, how they feed one another, where they come together, and then we can't say it enough. Without a mission or like a felt need, there was an article by McKinsey, the 5 sources of meaning: society, customer, company, team, and individual. Every group has about 20% of each of the 5. So if you're not speaking to all 5, you're missing a majority of the audience. And so a lot of organizations will talk about company, but not society or customer or team or individual. And so there's always a disconnect because people don't feel like they're part of the answer. As a result, they feel like they're part of the problem, or there's a translation issue across a financial to operational, or you never get past tool set to skill set to mindset to connect the dots. So it's hard. So not many get it right, but I think everybody has the ability to get it right. I don't think it's insurmountable. It just is a lot of hard work.
Would you say communication with the data becomes key?
As long as humans are involved, communication will be required, and I'm pretty sure humans are always going to be involved.
So knowing that, right, that every function has a set of people, best practices, if you reach back into the archives of your careers, any communication, feedback, lesson learned, best practices with your teams across the functions that you can share?
This was drilled into me at McKinsey in terms of effective communication, because you're a consultant, therefore you're always wrong and you're always to be blamed, and you have to justify your existence at all times. Part of it was that 5 sources of meaning I just talked about, right? There's a varied audience, and you need to speak to the varied audience and have it relate to them. I also think, and these are kind of consulting tricks, but they work. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. Right, so people learn through repetition. So you can't say it enough. So that's a funny way of saying adult learning is through repetition. So it's okay to repeat yourself until it sinks in and people embrace it. And I think the last one is never say more than 3. Right, I just did 3 because it's so beat into me. But 3 typically is a good number for people to be able to understand the message, but also to not lose the audience where there's a laundry list to go and get done. And if you can't distill it down to 3, that's an exercise worth doing. Mark Twain, I happen to like, I'll paraphrase the quote, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long letter. Right? It's really hard to distill down to the critical information, but it's worth it.
Sam?
A key lesson for me on communication has been, we always sometimes don't correctly calculate the opportunity cost of not communicating. Mm-hmm. And, I've been in many circumstances where, there's sensitive data, there's data which could be confidential or commercial. And when do you, lock things down and restrict communication, particularly when you're talking about a product development problem or, a cost culture problem? In my career, I've very seldom found circumstances where over-communication is the problem. 99 point, in fact, I'm trying to think of 1 or 2, like you need to be sensitive, you need to know the data you have, you need to work within the rules of your organization, absolutely. But you should always veer on sharing of the data with your teammates, because in the essence, it makes the juices flow, it makes the product go quicker, it makes your customer more successful, and generally leads to a better outcome.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd say with that is the way innovation happens is you first have to put yourself into the problem space. So you've got to have a good understanding of what the problem is, what the parameters are, what the boundaries are. And that needs to be a common shared view of that, because if you're starting from different assumptions or different measurements of the problem you're trying to solve, it's not going to be a surprise when you get to different answers, and that's chaos in a team. So you've got to create the opportunity for that understanding of the problem to be fairly widespread. And then you've also got to have all the right people in the room. You've got to have that manufacturing input. You've got to have that supply base input. You've got to have the design input. You've got to have what the customers have told you. Or you're not making a solution, you're making a partial solution, and you're going to be back to revisit it. And while we're planning for this idea of iterations, we still want every iteration to be the best it can be. Because guess what? All of our competitors are out there iterating as well. And so if we're going to continue to hold our place in the market, we're going to have to do the best we can with that information we have. A shared vision of where we are in the design, where we are in the manufacturing processes, where we are in the cost, where we are in the carbon footprint, whatever other parameters we're following, it has to be shared across the team or we're going to make different conclusions.
No, you talk about communication and sharing, but sometimes we all know that things don't go exactly the way we plan, right? We want the race to go flawlessly. We don't want to trip on the hurdle. We don't want to drop the baton. But sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes that happens. And I like to think about this, this area to say, how do you then reach out and intervene? Give some nuggets. People are people. People sometimes don't do the best communication. But recognizing that this is a truly team sport and we all are in it to win it, we're not there to fail, how do you intervene? How do you say, hey, you didn't quite hear what this was communicated, but doing it in a way that motivates and galvanizes the action to get back up and scale the hurdle again? Anybody with any thoughts?
I think for me, it has to be data-based. You know, you don't say, look, you failed. You say, this is the target that we had, and here's where we are. And a lot of times in a team environment, that's all you really need to do, is you need to say, this is what we aim to do, here's where we are, what can we do about that? People are not dumb or lazy for the most part. If you can establish clearly where you are relative to the metric, the team knows what to do. They just didn't know they needed to do it sometimes.
Yeah, and failure is part of the game, right? You know, if you clearly, you know, have to work towards customer requirements, you have to deliver, but you know, get that culture of competing and that having a go, trying, working out, failing, learning, doing is a culture that creates that sort of that consciousness that people can have to sort of drive towards success, right? But if you have it that failure is not tolerated, that will lock everything up quicker than anything else.
It was fascinating when the SpaceX rocket exploded and Elon Musk's comment was, look how much we're going to learn from this. You know, that was exactly the right response.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is it does start with what's the culture that you're, you know, is it a culture where if you fail, you're chastised, it's punitive, versus, you know, you're rewarded and encouraged, and what can we learn from that? So there is a starting point, but I think regardless of what the culture looks like, we are people, right? All of us have failed, and when we failed, we all felt the same way. Now, we may have handled it differently, we may have shown it differently, and so it's the perfect opportunity to come alongside someone, put your arm around them, literally or figuratively, and just say, hey, this happened to me one time, don't worry about it. You know, I'm doing okay, this is what I did to recover, how can I help you recover? We'll get through this, what can we learn? But you know, there's an emotional aspect in addition to everything that's been said around, I've done it, you've done it, we've done it, nobody died, we didn't break any laws, we're good, let's learn from this and let's move on. Now, at the same time, there's also repercussions where it's like, okay, you know, we may divide this task up because it might be too much for you, and that might be why something went wrong. We're gonna have, that's no criticism of your own, but that's the learning and that's the action from it, right? But there's a problem to be solved. The problem is something didn't go right. How are we gonna solve it? That solving also needs to be highly transparent so that it doesn't feel condemning and punitive. It's a course correction because we needed a course correction, and we never would have understood that had you not had that speed bump. And so, you know, partly thank you, but also partly let's learn from it and let's learn quickly. And so that you get this adage of, you know, fail fast, fail often, fail small.
Yeah.
Right? And that's okay. That's all about failure, but from failure you have a success.
Well, this is where it's valuable to have that customer on the team as well, because ultimately, if you're assessing success or failure, what does customer think of it? You know, individually or in the aggregate. Is this solving his need? Is this selling the right number of units? Ultimately, the customer's right, because if the customer is not right, you're not going to be in business very long.
So teasing that thought of customer on the team and a little bit of failure, the objective of the business and the objective of the customer requirements come into a little bit of conflict in this next scenario that I want you to comment to. And so the business would like you to finish and release the product, but from a customer perspective, they may say, guys, you're close, but you're not all the way there. How do you help the team in that environment balance in the culture both? Any perspective, experience on that topic?
I love it when the team fails with the customer involved, because sometimes the customer needs to see what that failure looks like and be involved in, in the standing back up and dusting yourself off and figure out what you do next. But when you get into that situation where it's what the customer wants versus what the company or the dealer wants, that's a little bit tougher, because then it's not a clear, obvious way to go forward. You're going to have to make a choice. And, a customer that's part of the team has seen the ups and downs. We haven't ever run into a problem where they didn't understand it. They might not like it. It's not exactly what they wanted, but hey, there's always another iteration coming. We can get closer to what you wanted, but we've got a lot of other customers that wanted this other alternative, and you move forward.
I agree. I think the version, iteration is absolutely critical, right? It's also a long-term relationship. It should be. If it's transactional, that's different, because it's I want it now, and I want it to do everything I want it to do, and I never ever want to talk to you again. Okay, fine, that happens, but that's not the customer you're striving for, and that's not the customer you want to be, right? You want a long-term relationship that says, okay, I understand, I'm going to get 80% of what I want in this version. 12 months from now, we'll have another version, and I'm going to get the 20% that was missing from this one, but also 40% that we're going to dream up between now and then. Okay, that's not a bad outcome. Just be transparent with me. Manage my expectations in advance, not at the 11th hour, oh, we're only going to give you 80, because then you're going to utilize the cuss and discuss method of getting through that problem, and that's not going to be a lot of fun.
And this is one of the tricks on utilization of the sort of canvas concept, right? In that if you've got good product management, good marketeers, they can connect along that canvas also key understanding of customer value. And as you iterate and work through, the ability to communicate forward with your customer about how you want to walk with them through those series of value, it can overcome some of the difficult issues, because you're not just there for the next milestone, you're there for the complete journey, right? And looking at how you do your product management, relating value to each release as that comes out, and then communicating that with your customer, sharing that with your customer, and putting any changes or issues or fallbacks within that context creates a much better way of developing a long-term relationship.
So lightning.
It's called concurrent engineering, right?
Yes.
Concurrent engineering, that's made its way to the panel. So lightning round, before we kind of summarize this up and let the audience ask questions. A nugget from your career that you want everyone in the room to know about how you drove within your function and across your companies a culture of cost.
For me, it would be that there are a lot of different ways to fail, but there are some commonalities of teams that succeed. And the commonalities that I've seen is they work as a team, they have a common shared vision of what they're trying to accomplish and where they are on the roadmap, where they are in terms of status versus their targets.
Another trick around cost, because generally people see cost as a negative thing, is gamify it, right? Make it fun, right? Have it that, cost goals become something that leads to something the team benefits. But think about gamifying it.
Gamifying it.
I'll share something that hasn't been shared, just so it's additive as opposed to just saying the same thing over and over. Absolutely, I think there's a component of have fun, right? I worked at Caterpillar one time. They had a quality control system. Somebody had gone out to dinner, and they got vibrating coasters at dinner, and they're like, well, why don't we give the quality team vibrating coasters so we know when our parts have been confirmed? And they had fun with it, right? It's like, who cares? As long as the efficiency's there and so just have fun, right? A funny example, but the point around having fun. I think the other part of it, I'll make it individual as opposed to team. Something that I've prided myself on, and I'm trying to be humble, I'm not trying to brag, but something that has been said to me throughout my career is that I am coachable and approachable, not just approachable, right? I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to learn, I'm part of the team, I don't put myself first, right? The other thing that I've been told is, you've helped me as much with my career as you have with my life. Be a friend, right? It will make all the difference in the world. Right? Don't put yourself first and be a friend, and you'll be the ultimate team member, regardless of your role. Most of the time I've been in a leadership type of role, but at the same time, nobody ever thought of me as the leader. They thought of me as a member, right? And I allowed them to be leaders, and it works. You're gonna create an environment where you can accomplish so much more.
And I'll add on to that, as a leader, the one thing I used to try to do when I was in a sourcing role is put myself in the other person's shoes. Yeah. What are they receiving from me? What do I think their concerns are? What could be some of their challenges? How do I get to the middle? I think in the beginning someone talked about compromise and collaboration. I think always trying to see the world from the perspective that you're not in helps you be more approachable and to be more coachable in that way, to be able to be truly as part of the team. So we tried to kind of summarize through our discussion a number of key takeaways that we wanted to have everyone in the room take away, and then we want to open this up to questions from all of you. We started from the customer perspective, clear requirements, really truly understand communicating across the organization exactly what the customer expects, and making that information bite-sized and consumed in whatever function you may be sitting in. Your team performance is measured through common metrics. Everybody has the same view, the same success factor that they're all striving for. Everybody's operating without boundaries, right? There's no more silos. I know it's tough to say, but really trying to do that means putting yourself in someone else's shoes, sharing the data, having an intervention, communicate, and then measuring from the customer's perspective. Measuring from the customer's perspective. What better way to galvanize an entire organization is to look at this as a complete team from the eyes of the customer. Which means you got to consider both the customer experience and what the business wants. You are in a business. You need to generate cash and profit to continue to iterate the next evolution of design, but having that healthy balance to consider both. And then that last but not least, I think what was great up here is there was a lot of feedback, lessons learned. And they can be complementary, but they can also be critical. And that's how you create a learning environment and a culture that all operates with a consciousness on cost and a consciousness on the customer. So we want to thank you for listening, but at this time we wanted to open this up to questions that you may have.
In my previous experience in working in Detroit, I found that a lot of people gained the appreciation and understanding of costs by spending a couple of years, if not more, in the factory. But it seems that that seems to be less popular, or it happens less frequently. So what are some other ways that people can not just learn about costs, but experience, cost controls and how to care about costs, how to manage costs?
Yeah, one lesson I learned is communicating product performance as low as possible. Like, you can talk about cost, you can talk about margin, you can talk about revenue, but product performance, right? Either whether it's how it's doing with the customer or how it's doing cost-wise or margin-wise, how low can you get that? Because once again, as I said earlier, you really don't, I've never seen any backlash from getting that data as low as possible. Clearly there are some financial metrics that are sensitive, but I think you can get product performance and financial performance data pretty low in an organization, and I think that works.
I'd also say balanced, right? The balanced scorecard has been around for forever. I don't know that it's very well balanced, and I don't know that it's talked about in a balanced way. There's still room to improve on a tried and true method.
I think the thing that I would say relative to the idea of a factory visit, I still think that's a great thing for our engineers. We want them out on the farm at least a couple times a year. We want them out in the factories as often as they can be, but they also need to be home designing. One of the things that's changed from when I was sitting at the drafting boards is this whole electronic revolution in the presence of information on the internet, and the amount of information you can get about processes and about applications remotely is phenomenal. So there's this tremendous opportunity to bring in little tiny tidbits It doesn't replace going out to the factory and seeing a few processes, but our designs are so complicated now, you can't see all the processes you're designing for. So you got to go see a few. You got to get the flavor for what it is the factory is, the flavor for what your customers are doing. But then you've got a lot of information that can come to you in tools like a priori, but also in tools like YouTube. You know, it's a different world than it was 40 some years ago when young engineers.
Yesterday.
Yesterday. When young engineers were sent out to the factory floor for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or whatever it was to learn all the shop processes. So the world's changed, we have to change with it.
I'm still pro factory visits and supplier visits.
I am too.
But I also think the other thing that just came up here is a sales call. Was going out and seeing your product with customers and getting that feedback live, or inviting the customer in to give you that feedback live. It tells you where you stand in a competitive landscape, right? You're brand A versus brand B, and you want to win at brand A. I think that's another way to get folks really thinking about how we compete as a team by having that product out there. But I'm still pro. Figure out a way to get them to make the factory cool. It is a cool place to go.
Yeah.
How does a priori help play a role here? Like, I'm just tying it together. What's your take on that? You know, we had a lot of different perspectives here, but just helping the audience kind of tie it together. What are your thoughts?
I'm happy to chime in. I'm going to link it to the previous question as well as here. What all of us ended up saying in different ways was experiential learning. Learn by doing, right? You can listen to a lecture, you can look at a PowerPoint, you can watch a video. Each of those has a progressive adoption curve to them. The only adoption that's at 100% is physically go out and do it and learn it, right? It's ride the bike. I was at a workshop, they talked about riding the bike. They had a bike, and they went around the room and found somebody that had not ridden a bike in 20 years. Carpeted room like this, and like, can you ride this bike? They got on it and they rode it within seconds. It'd been 20 years. The only way you can have a 20-year gap in practicing and instantly pick it back up again is experiential learning. And so what I think a priori does is it allows you to interact and understand what's the data, how am I going to use it, what parameters do I have to manipulate and change and control, what am I trying to solve for, if I make this change, this happens, is that a positive, is that a negative? It's basically learn by doing. Right? And every time you do it, you're now like, okay, I now know a trick. I'm going to always go here and toy around with this. I'm always going to think about this. Now that I know that this is the lever to pull, I'm going to always design it that way so I don't even have to pull it after the fact. It's just automatically built into the way I think about and engaged with design or costing or sustainability, whatever the parameter, right? But I think it's the penultimate ride the bike type of environment, because you're interacting with the data and you're learning with the data real time, and those learnings will never disappear, and you're going to start building them into naturally what you do instantaneously, and then learn new tricks on top of that.
Yeah, good. From my perspective, it's the single source of the truth. Like, if you can derive your metrics based off your CAD data and your model-based engineering, really it's the whole thread that goes through your business. Now, with a priori, you can take it out of your PLM, you can bring it into supply chain, you can bring it into manufacturing. What I'd like to see, Chris, is how far can we take it? Because can you bring it all the way to your customer, right? Or the customer's customer? Because by expressing a standard data set, a standard data form, all the way through that thread, that's how you get an esprit de corps, a focus around a goal, and miscommunications are cleared up between your team and your customer, and how that moves forward. And I think that's the biggest opportunity for a priori.
Yeah, it's our common shared vision.
Speed of it, right? So in addition to its accessibility and single source of the truth, just think about how fast that data becomes real-time available to every function that's working in there. The collaboration aspect of it, the ability to have I call it a comparative model in the sourcing space, decision trade-offs and making. I think that the tools can provide so much visibility for an entire organization when utilized across the entire organization, not just for that single source of truth, but the speed of it, the communication of it, and the action that you can take inside of it is pretty powerful.